Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Mini Thingcast. Now, usually this is a weekly podcast that's exclusive to my Patreon subscribers, but I thought that I would make this week's episode available on YouTube because I wanted to share my thoughts on this topic and I wanted to give people a kind of taste or an idea of the stuff that I'm going to start doing for this podcast in the future. And if you'd like to listen to future episodes and support the show, you can do that by heading on over to patreon.com/LachlanLikesAthing. And to all my existing patrons, thank you very much for your generous support. Now, the other day I was watching the documentary Downloaded on Netflix. And Downloaded is a documentary that chronicles the history, I guess, of Napster, with interviews with all the relevant figures involved. And if you don't remember Napster, or if you weren't around for Napster, Napster was one of the first file sharing programs that people would use to exchange music, and a lot of it was obviously pirated music. And I wasn't old enough at the time to use Napster. When I started using file sharing programs, Napster was basically already dead, and I was using LimeWire and Kazaa for completely legitimate purposes. But I was really struck watching that documentary that you saw these interviews with recording industry executives, and you saw them interviews with musicians. And it's been 15 years, and it still feels like that the music industry and musicians are still going through this transition period where we're trying to find a sustainable model for music to be made, when essentially music revenues have plummeted when you compare them to 2000 levels. I mean, revenues from digital music sales are nowhere near the revenue from CD sales at the height that kind of media popularity. And what's really funny is that you have interviews with people like Trent Reznor in the documentary, and Trent Reznor is recognized as a person who's been quite progressive about the music industry and things like intellectual property rights and that kind of thing. You see Trent Reznor in the documentary basically slamming Napster and saying that it's going to put musicians out of house and home. So I thought it was really interesting, and it really made me sit up and think I actually need to look into this whole streaming music thing, because that is today's controversy when it comes to working out where the future of the music industry is going, and how musicians are essentially going to get paid. And I've avoided signing up for Spotify or Tidal or anything in the past because I kind of like buying CDs. And I guess that's the first time that I'm getting old now. I just like buying CDs. When I try to get an album, first I try to see if the artist has their own personal page or Bandcamp. That's the first thing I do because I want to give them a cut, the biggest cut possible. And then I try and see if the record label has a digital download. And if I can't get that, then I will go out and get the CD, or I'll get it from iTunes if I can't get the CD. And, it's sort of a troublesome process, but I don't mind doing it. But I realize that a lot of people now listen to music either on Spotify or on some other similar streaming product, or they do what a lot of people do now, and even I do this, when you share music and that kind of thing, you listen on YouTube. A lot of people just listen to music on YouTube. Apparently that's the number one destination for just listening to music for the younger generation. And again, I feel like I'm an old man just saying that. But I thought, so I should actually sign up and have a think about what's the deal with these services, because so many of my existing subscribers probably use them. Now, there is a controversy about Spotify, and companies like Tidal have been quite public about this, but also individual musicians. And the basic controversy comes down to this. Spotify is a subscription-based music service. So if you pay $10 a month, or you get a free account and you listen to music and there's ads, and then you get access to a catalog, all you can eat, of more than 30 million tracks. And the controversy is basically musicians don't make much money at all from Spotify streaming. So I found this infographic online, and I'll link it in the description of this post. But basically, it breaks down like this. If an artist, say an independent artist, released a bunch of $10 CDs, they would need to sell 143 of them to make $1,160, which is the US monthly minimum wage. In order to make that same amount by selling tracks on iTunes, they would have to sell 12,399 individual tracks to make $1,160 because iTunes takes their 30% cut. But if you wanted to make the same amount, $1,160 on Spotify, your track would need to be played 4 million times, more than 4 million times, which is astounding. That is truly a kind of shocking figure, and it really demonstrates that the kind of revenue that you get from these services is nowhere near the previous revenues, even for digital downloads. And another way to put into perspective, there's a musician I like. Her name is Zoe Keating. She's this cellist who does these amazing pieces where she layers. She plays the cello and then she uses an electronic doohickey thing. I don't know what it's called, but she uses it to layer music, her playing against her own playing. So she builds up these cello tracks, and they're really very cool. And recently she released her 2013 revenues from her music sales to demonstrate how much she gets paid. And for instance, she made $38,000 from iTunes sales. She made $25,000 from sales on Bandcamp, and that was off the back of only about 30,000 or so plays of her music. On Spotify, she had 400,000 plays, and she made $1,764. And again, that's for the whole of 2013. So it's basically nothing. I can tell you that I've made more money from my YouTube videos than Zoe has made from Spotify. And Zoe, I went to the Opera House and saw her perform. She's a really, really talented musician. So it's kind of really crazy. And Tidal recently came out, and Tidal is a competing music service to Spotify, and their big kind of deal, they say, is that they pay 4 times the royalty fees to their musicians. And it's Jay-Z's service. And they kind of, I guess, botched the launch and they botched the initial publicity because they got a whole bunch of people like Daft Punk and Jay-Z and everyone stood up on stage, and it looked like a bunch of rich musicians patting themselves on the back and asking for more money. But recently there was an article on The Verge called Tidal's Point Break, and I've been reading all about this controversy and all the different sides, and it did point out that what Tidal was trying to do is they're trying to act more like a music label, and besides offering more royalties to musicians, they're trying to do more to support up-and-coming musicians. They're kind of taking a more curatorial approach, and the suggestion of the article is that the people at Tidal really want to make it possible for people to keep making music as a sustainable job that pays a minimum wage. And on the flip side, there's the argument for Spotify. And the argument for Spotify, and this is the argument that Spotify makes themselves, is that they are a really good music discovery service. They aren't going to make heaps of money for musicians, but the artists shouldn't think about it that way. They should think about Spotify as a platform where they can put their music and people can discover them. And this is very much like the arguments for music piracy, which were more or less vindicated. And they mentioned this in Downloaded 15 years ago. It's the suggestion that people who pirate music tend to buy more music than casual listeners. And even if you have a big pool of free tier listeners, so like Spotify has 60 million users and 45 million of them are on the free tier, you have this whole audience of people who might find your music through Spotify, and then they go on and become fans who go out to concerts, who buy your merchandise, etc., etc. And if you weren't on Spotify, then you wouldn't be getting paid at all. So you may as well be on Spotify. And at the very least, Spotify pays out more than YouTube, where a lot of people listen and discover music. So, it's better than nothing. And there's always the comparison with radio, which is another free ad-supported service. And, people might have complained about radio at some point. I'm not even sure. I mean, people would have complained about the printing press at some point. But today, we recognize that radio is a good thing. It does mean that people can discover new artists, and at the same time, we have things like it's never been easier for an artist now to break out on social media and to get fans and to engage with people, etc., etc. But I do think the comparison with radio is slightly flawed, because Spotify is not quite the same as radio. Spotify is high fidelity, on demand music. And literally, if you have Spotify, you don't really need to buy the album anymore. It's not like the radio where, oh, you listen to that track, oh, that's really cool. Maybe I'll go home and buy that track. With Spotify, you can listen to the track and you can save it to your library, and it's more or less as if you now own the album and you no longer need to purchase or spend any additional money beyond the $10 subscription fee or the ad-supported service. So I kind of know this from personal experience, from getting Netflix, where I got Netflix, I pay $10 a month, and now, I used to buy DVDs all the time. I used to buy lots of DVDs and Blu-rays, and now I don't really buy them anymore, because every time I walk into a store and think, oh, $10, that's cool, I want to kind of get that. And then I think, but I could probably watch this or something else on Netflix. And I only really want to get this disc if I really, really, really know that I love this movie, or that there's special features on the disc that I otherwise couldn't find. So it's a sort of difficult situation, and this issue isn't simply because Spotify is a greedy company that isn't paying out enough royalties. Spotify pays out 70% of all the revenue it makes as royalties to musicians and record labels, 70%, and it still isn't a profitable company. This is the amazing thing that a lot of people, I don't think, realize. Spotify doesn't make money at the moment. They're not a sustainable company. They're hoping that as they expand and more people get on the premium subscription, they can actually start to turn a profit. The problem is that basically it used to cost $10 to buy a single album at a music store. And now it costs $10, or it's free, to access 30 million songs and to listen to as much as you like. And you get a bunch of people now, they're all fighting over a bigger slice of a pie that I think, is getting smaller and smaller. And it's because I think people are just used to paying less for entertainment, and not just for music, in all terms of all kinds of entertainment. Now, I always say that no one, it's nice to have music, and a lot of people like to say that they couldn't live without music, or they couldn't live without movies or film or literature or something. But I don't think anyone has the right to free entertainment. It isn't a basic human resource that's recognized by the United Nations, like food or water or shelter. It does cost money to provide, culture or entertainment. It does. There is an opportunity cost. Otherwise, the musician or the artist could be doing something else entirely with their time to feed themselves. But entertainment has kind of fallen to a near zero cost, because since the advent of computers, which are incredibly high-fidelity copying machines, people have had to compete with piracy, which means competing with free. So we kind of developed a new model for paying for entertainment, which is, instead of actually paying for it, instead of paying money to watch something or listen to something, we instead exchange our personal data and our information to large companies like Google. We give a lot of personal data over to companies so that they can deliver targeted advertising to us alongside free entertainment. And that's our end of the deal, right? We give them our data, we give them our information, and then they gave us the entertainment. But now there's this model is starting to not work. And it's starting to not work because of two reasons. One is now people increasingly have privacy concerns about the way that data is being used and it's being mined. And I think that's perfectly legitimate, because it's actually truly amazing how much data that can be gathered from your personal browsing habits on the internet. And I say this quite, full disclosure. I have a YouTube channel. I get analytics data from the people who watch my channel. YouTube gives me information about nothing personally identifiable, but they give me information about who watches my videos, from what country they come from, what kind of age group they are in, how long they watch videos, etc., etc. They give me this information so that hopefully I can make better videos when I study this information and I can see what works and what doesn't. But it's kind of startling how much information is being gathered from people on their day-to-day use. So I think it's a very valid concern to be worried about giving over this sort of personal data and information. And the other side of this, the other reason why this sort of ad-supported model is breaking down is because more and more people are blocking the ads. More and more people are using ad block. There's an article in The Economist. In 2012, 50 million users were using ad block, and in 2015, that's quadrupled to an estimated 200 million people. So we're in this situation where we don't want the ad-supported model anymore. We don't like the ads. We don't like giving away our personal information. But we can't imagine going back to the previous model where we actually had to pay closer to what it actually cost to produce the entertainment we want to consume. So we've developed the habit now. We've developed the kind of expectation that a lot of this media should be free, but we now sort of recognize the real cost of this so-called free media, and we essentially want to have our cake and eat it too. And I think it's perfectly understandable. I am in the same situation. We can't afford to pay for all the entertainment that we sort of consume. In the face of this argument, I think a lot of people sit back and say, well, this is a market transition, and there are winners and losers, and musicians and the recording industry will just have to adjust. But I do think that consumers have to adjust as well. They have to recognize that if they want their favorite musicians to keep making music, they have to have a sustainable income from their work. And that means that they have to get used to the idea of directly supporting these musicians, because advertising revenue isn't really paying that much. Streaming media, even subscription services, isn't really paying that much. It's not going to cover the cost of what it takes to make music or to make movies or that kind of thing anymore. And we see that now. We see that transition increasingly for musicians and things like that. Well, we see things like Bandcamp, where it's musicians directly selling to people, or things like Patreon, where artists are directly soliciting funds from their fans. And then you can do the traditional things like concerts and merchandise, etc., etc. And there is still a role for the record industry. As much as everyone criticizes the record industry, there is a recognition among artists that the record labels do provide promotional support and logistical support for some things that musicians simply can't manage for themselves. So, for instance, Trent Reznor, after criticizing record labels, he ended up going back to Interscope because he says things have changed now. The music labels recognize that their role has changed, but an independent artist can't be expected to, arrange things like concerts or have a staff of people or employ a bunch of people to arrange those kind of things for them, licensing, royalties, that kind of stuff. So that's why we have record labels. They have economies of scale. They can perform these functions for artists. So they, should exist. They should have a cut. It's just a question of how much of a cut they take. I think this is a really difficult kind of topic. I have to debate with myself whether or not to spend $1 on a mobile app, and spending $10 or $20 to voluntarily support a musician when I could be listening to their music for essentially free on Spotify or on YouTube or something. It seems sort of crazy. On the other hand, I know that I can spend $10 on some mediocre meal at a restaurant, and I'm pretty sure that a good album enriches my life more than some hipster burger. I like to think that if I met my favorite musicians in real life, I'd buy them a drink. So, just as a way of saying thanks. So if I can't meet them, I try to support my favorite musicians any way I can. As I said, I try to get it through their Bandcamp or whatever, try to give them the biggest cut. And for the same reason, up until now, I haven't really explored Spotify. But as I said, I watched that Napster documentary and I realized that I actually had to check this out, because this is the way that, this isn't going to go away no matter how much Taylor Swift or Jay-Z complain about it. This is the future. So I did get a Spotify account, and I can see that the service is great. It's amazing. 30 million tracks at your fingertips. I can understand why people subscribe. It's actually a lot easier than YouTube, because on Spotify you can follow an artist, and then if they release a new album, it pops up in Spotify. So it's a great way to stay in contact with your musicians, and it really does work as a music discovery service, because when someone suggests a track, I can see their entire discography on Spotify. It's nice, and I think that's worth paying $10 a month for. But I have to internally tell myself that I have to make sure that this kind of unlimited subscriptions doesn't end up changing my habits, where I stop supporting the musicians I like the most because I feel like I already get the music. Because I am kind of afraid that the same thing will happen where what's happened with Netflix, where I noticed that I have spent less on the things that I like. So those are my sort of thoughts on this topic. I also have a link in the description of this post to a Spotify playlist that I set up with all the music I like. So hopefully you can check that out and you can find music and new artists to support. Now, obviously, when I talk about this stuff, there is a parallel between what I'm talking about with Spotify and my own situation of making YouTube videos, because I have this direct funding through Patreon. And so naturally I'm interested in this topic, and I have my own personal bias, and you're very entitled to say that I have a self-interest in talking about people's habits changing and having to directly support people who make content. But this is a transition, and I think this is inarguable. This is a transition that is taking place all across the media industry. We're still trying to find a model that actually works sustainably, and we can see newspapers going through the same problem, the music industry, even YouTube itself, because YouTube now is proposing launching a subscription service to pay, you pay $10 and you don't get ads, and there's a bunch of other stuff. There's this sort of painful transitionary period, and hopefully we'll arrive at a place where this kind of stuff all works out. But I would really love to hear your thoughts on this topic. I think it's really interesting. It really comes down to how you relate to your favorite musicians, and putting and people don't like to talk about money, a lot of things, but it really a lot of the times this basically boils down to putting a dollar value on how much you like something. So I'd love to hear about your own personal habits, how you purchase music these days, how you listen to music, where you listen to the music, that kind of thing. And of course, if you would like to listen to future episodes of this mini ThinkCast, if you enjoy this, you can do that by joining the people supporting this show and by becoming a Patreon subscriber over at patreon.com/LachlanLikesAthing. And thank you once again for your support. I'm looking forward to your comments, and have a great week.